Hey guys, welcome back to a year of Final Fantasy, and wow, it actually feels like forever since I've done this, since all the holidays and everything, but never fear, I do have the next 3 episodes written, so you can expect a continuous stream of content from here on out. Anyway, like I said, welcome back to a year of Final Fantasy, and today is the last episode before this year's finale of Final Fantasy XII, and this is a game that took a lot of people by surprise, I think, and this is Final Fantasy Revenant Wings, which is actually a sequel to Final Fantasy XII, and even more shocking, it came out on the DS of all systems. Beyond Revenant Wings, we're going to briefly talk about a few other games to round out this whole Ivalice Alliance project. You know I like to be complete or as thorough as possible. Anyway, Revenant Wings was originally its own game, bearing no real ties to any other game in this series until it was decided during development to be attached to Final Fantasy XII. It was released on April 26, 2007 in Japan, November 20th, 2007 in the States, and February 15, 2008 for the EU regions. Strangely enough, taken from many interviews from the developers, it's encouraged for people to not think of this as Final Fantasy XII-2, and instead just view it as the latest Final Fantasy game. It's pretty easy to understand both sides of the argument actually, as this game plays in a similar style to, let's say, a real-time strategy game like StarCraft or something like that, although quite a bit different admittedly. And the reason it was on the DS was to take advantage of the touch control of the DS. It's almost impossible to accomplish that feat on regular consoles. Anyway, on the other hand, it's hard not to see it as Final Fantasy XII-2 because basically that's exactly what it is, at least story-wise. Our heroes in this game are much like Final Fantasy XII. We have Vaan and Penelo, amongst some of the other heroes that come back, and this is a story of them embarking on adventures as sky pirates about a year-ish after the events of Final Fantasy XII. Several systems are intact here, but they've been greatly simplified for the DS and the new system of combat. That is to say, like the Gambit system is here, but there's basically only one thing that you can assign a person to do to kind of fill that character's niche. And some other things appear here like quickenings, but again, they're just smaller in scope. The term Revenant Wings here has a lot of different meanings. Revenant meaning a general return of something. Here we have the classic Final Fantasy characters of Final Fantasy XII returning for their adventures, but also we have what I assume is the more meaningful intent of the game, which is the return of the, see if I pronounce this right, Aegeal race, which are actually a separate race on Ivalice that have lived in the sky for eons, and they've just recently made their return. Of course, our main characters stumble upon one of these people from that particular race in their sky adventures. You know, it's not mind-blowing or anything, but, you know, it serves its purpose. There's not a lot more to talk about, honestly, in reference of this game. I mean, Revenant Wings here gives a new layer of the realm of Ivalice with this Aegeal race, as well as just introducing a new type of gameplay to the Final Fantasy series. It's definitely an interesting game, and if you're looking for something different, definitely check it out. It's pretty easy to find and cheap-ish as well, around 20 bucks or so during the recording of this in 2017. And before we end with this game, there are a few more games that I'd like to at least mention a little bit for completeness sake of this Ivalice Alliance compilation. Of course, I did mention them in the kind of overview of the entire project, but here I'll go and just say a few things about them. So I've already talked about Crystal Defenders near the beginning of this whole year Final Fantasy project during the month of Siren, which was February. So if you want to hear about Crystal Defenders, just yeah, go watch that. Anyway, beyond that, there's still a few games to talk about, like Dive to Hunt and the Adventures of Sorbet, which I kind of commented on that it's like a Dragon Ball name, like Frieza, or yeah, whatever. There's also a mobile game of Final Fantasy Tactics S, and there was this codenamed Fortress game, which I'll just briefly talk a little bit about at the end of this. Anyway, Dive to Hunt and Adventure Sorbet was a game that took place in Ivalice about a treasure hunter Moogle named Sorbet with his helper Frappe. Go figure. This was actually featured on, and this dates it a lot, Square Enix's MySpace page as a Flash game, which clearly, you know, Flash is basically dead now. But anyway, as of this recording, I actually can't find the game, so if anyone has it or wants to, you know, let me know where to play it, yeah, I'd love to hear that. But from what I can tell, it's just a simple game of this Moogle diving for treasure and stuff like that. That's pretty much it. I mean, what more can you expect from a Flash game? But moving on, there was a mobile game that launched in Japan on May 28th, 2013 and ended its service on July 31st of 2014, and that's Final Fantasy Tactics S. It kind of just stayed its welcome for about a year or so and then left. It seemed ambitious enough, adding a lot of new jobs, and that's great, but ultimately the game disappointed everyone, as battles actually played out themselves, which is like the point of a Final Fantasy Tactics game, and as you can imagine, they just axed it, and it kind of sucks, because even though it's a crappy game, from a game preservationist standpoint, which I'm definitely for, you know, it just kind of sucks to see this lost to the ether, but whatever. And finally, we're going to come to the game that was only recently talked about, known as Final Fantasy Fortress, or Codename Fortress, or whatever you want to call it. This was actually set in the Final Fantasy XII world, where you'd play as Bosch von Ronsenberg, which you'll know who he is later on whenever we talk about Final Fantasy XII, but it aimed for a style of like a third-person action game, maybe like Devil May Cry, Dark Souls, or of course Square Enix's Dirge of Cerberus. And that game was actually never formally announced, and I would assume it just never found the funding to come out of its like pre-planning phase or whatever. But it was said in private E3 at 2011 to the website videogamer.com that Fortress would never be released. I don't know, it's just a really interesting tidbit of history there. So that ends out the Ivalice Alliance Save for the Game of the Month of Final Fantasy XII, which we will dive into soon, I promise. So as always, until next time, Crystal Warriors, keep on gaming.